Okay, so just as a review about David so far. Okay, remember the last week, King Saul died, and because King Saul was now dead, David asked God whether he should return to Judah or not, and he said yes. So David went home to Judah. Now, remember, Judah is where David is from. King Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. Okay, so when he got back to Judah, David they made him and the people, remember, the people were real pleased with David. Okay, then David was made king of Judah. Okay, but at that point in time, he was not made king over all Israel, because what happened was Saul's two sons took over the throne of King Saul, and King Saul, of course, was the king of all Israel. And so what that meant, once again, was that David would have to go out and fight the house of Saul. All right, and so we're into, well, he does do that, and where we start off tonight is where David becomes king over Israel. Okay, so we're into the book of 2 Samuel now, and I just summarized some things from chapters 1 through 5. Okay, because remember, I promised you we weren't going to read about the blood and guts and the cutting heads off and stuff like that. So, okay, so David is now king over Israel. Now, before we actually read the scriptures, there's some basic things from what we teach from the Aramaic teachings that I wanted to kind of bring to your attention. And first off, and we will see this, actually we'll read this again, but having to do with mourning. Okay, and so I have two passages here about mourning. And notice, okay, came to pass that, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes torn and earth upon his head. And those tearing your clothes and then putting earth upon his head or getting down as a sign of mourning. It is the way that they mourned. Anytime you're reading in the Bible and somebody has died, that is the way they mourned. And then when we get to 2 Samuel here, then David took hold of his clothes and tore them. And this is after he learned of the death of King Saul. And likewise all the men who were with them. And they mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son, and for the people of the Lord and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. So this type of mourning, and I think that perhaps we'll see some of this now with the war going on over there, because the custom is still at hand. Okay, so enough about mourning. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention, and we've mentioned it before, but I just wanted to to mention it again, and we'll read these two passages of scripture. Okay, then David said to the young man who told him, "Where do you come from?" And he answered, "I'm the son of a proselyte." Okay, this is again after Saul's death. And David said to him, "How was it that you were not afraid to stretch forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" And David called one of the young men and said to him, "Go near and fall upon him." And he drew near and fell upon him, and he smote him so that he died. And David said to him, "Your blood be upon your head, for your mouth has testified against you, for you have said, I have slain the Lord's anointed." Okay, now let me read this other one, and then let's talk about this. And then David commanded his young men, and they slew them. And this was when he was fighting the Philistines, and cut off their hands and their feet, and hanged them on the hill in Hebron. But they took the head as Bashul and buried it in the sepulchre of Abner in Hebron. Now, there's a difference between culture and I call it the command of God. And what we're talking about here, all right, the way that we have studied the Bible in the West here, we get very disturbed and wait a minute, hold on, I'm sorry. We get very disturbed about these passages and about David and killing, doing this and or killing. Well, the one thing we have to remember is that this is cultural. This was not religious per se. I mean, I know the government and religion was the same, but God, and here's what we get in the West as well. Why did God told David to slew these men? And God, no, we have seen places where David has asked God and he's gotten advice, but God never told David, nor the people like from Joshua's time on, where they had war and they went in and they killed all the women, the children, the cows, the cattle, everything. And that was not a command from God. Okay, that was the culture of the time. That is what they did. And here, David is doing this. That is what they did. Okay, and and we also have the thing that contributes to this is it was the belief system of the time. Okay, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. All right, you killed some of me, we're going to kill some of you. Does it sound familiar, those of you that might follow the news these days? But we'll talk about that later. All right, but God did not tell David to kill the Amalekite that we just learned about. It was cultural. It was what they did. Okay, and David, of course, has maintained that anybody that killed in towards the king or was going to kill towards the king, that was a major no-no, and he could have revenge because the king was the anointed one of God. So it does not make sense to us in our culture because that's something we don't want. And the thing that you want to remember is that remember Jesus taught something different than an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and whatnot. And remember too that Jesus taught from the Torah, because people nowadays say, well, how did he know? I mean, they don't have any idea. Well, they don't, first of all, they don't even believe that he's a Jew, and they don't have They just don't have any idea to connect the Old Testament to the New Testament. But anyway, that's what Jesus came to change. I mean, Jesus came to change and to fulfill the law. Okay. All right. So that's a difference. You have to keep that in mind. That no, God, and people say that all the time. Well, God commanded David to kill. No, God did not command David to do that. Okay. And um and just a little bit here in I think this 1 Samuel 121. It might be 2 Samuel, but anyway, okay. Oh, you mountains of Gilboa. Again, this was when I think this should be 2 Samuel, but this was when the Philistines had defeated um, uh, King Saul. And so this is kind of a lament, sort of. Oh, you mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, neither let there be rain upon you, nor upon the choicest fields. Okay, that is cultural. That is called cursing. And just a note here, if you want to know what cursing is all about in the Bible, Psalm 109, the whole thing is about cursing. And you could also say revenge because if you we'll read these first 4 verses, but the whole thing is about it. So, command thou vengeance against them, and let Satan stand at their right hand. When they shall be judged, let them be condemned, and let their prayer become sin. Let their days be few, and let others take what they have stored. Let their children be fatherless, and their wives widows. So, and this cursing is also present today, not only in the ancient Near East, but um, Italians. I'm not picking on them, but Italians have this curse. It's not doesn't have anything to do with God or whatnot. It is a cultural thing, and so I just wanted to do that because you will see that you'll see that some more too as we read. Okay, now let's get. All right, so we're going to chapter 6. That's really what we're going to do tonight. And George is going to help me read scripture again.
Again, David gathered together all the young men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose with all the people who were with him of the men of Judah and went to Geba to bring up from thence the ark of God. For at that place was invoked the name of the Lord of hosts, who dwells upon the cherubim. And they set the ark of God upon a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab. That was Gibeah, and Uzzah and Ahiah, the sons of Abinadab, drove the cart, walking behind. And they brought the ark of God out of the house of Abinadab, which was in Gibeah, and Ahiah went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel danced before the Lord, waving branches of cedar trees, cypress, and played upon harps, lyres, timbrels, cornets, and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floors of Uzzah, put forth his hand to the ark of the Lord and took hold of it, for the oxen broke loose from the harness. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and the Lord smote him there because he put forth his hand to the ark, and he died there beside the ark of God. And David was displeased because the Lord had stricken Uzzah, and he called the name of that place Taretha Uzzah. And so it is called even to this day. And David was afraid of the Lord that day. And he said, how shall I bring in the ark of the Lord to me?
Okay, now before we go on, the ark of the covenant was, well, it was carried along with the tribes after they came up out of the desert. They put it together. There's very specific things. If you go to, I don't know, it's one of those, Exodus or Numbers, whatever. But anyway, that was the big thing. And there was some concern about it when in 1 Samuel about where were they going to keep the ark. Okay. So now that David is king over all Israel, then the ark, and that David is now in Jerusalem. They wanted to bring the ark there. No. Okay. So we'll come back to that one to that one scripture. But you read about Uzzah, okay? And let's look at the picture first. All right, that's kind of an example of what it was. Okay, and you see that they have the handles on the back here and on the front, and that's how they carried it. And there was, all right, and let's look at this one too. Okay, we've seen this one before, but essentially, that the last picture, I don't know if they had doors that they put the bread in, but anyway, okay. But mainly, okay, the it obviously, well, it was carried by people. Somebody was in the back, but it was also towed by oxen. All right, and so what we see here, all right, and there was a rule, a sacred rule, that no one touched the Ark of the Covenant. It was extremely sacred, and no one touched it. But poor Uzzah, okay, the oxen, the whatever you want to call it, the harness or whatever, for the oxen came loose. And had Uzzah not touched it, grabbed it, then it would have fallen. And uh, so what we have to note here, and it says, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah. Now we're talking belief systems here again, and the Lord smote him there, okay, because he put his hand, and he died there beside the ark. Okay. Uzzah, okay, he did not touch the ark deliberately. He did it. It was a a reaction. It was an impulse. Okay. It was through his zeal and ignorance that he reached out to the ark of the Lord so that he could support it, fearing it would fall and break. Now, okay. So, and then notice it says, and because he touched it, then it says the anger of the Lord was kindled, and the Lord smote him because he put his hand forth. Okay. And he died. Well, okay. Belief systems again. Remember, the Lord doesn't smote anybody. And but again, the belief system. And the Lord did not get angry, okay, but he died there. He died there not because God killed him or smote him, whatever, but if you think about this, if there's something like very, very sacred, and I could even be something physical. I don't know, like a vase or a vase from the ancient whatever, da 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 da, da and maybe you knocked it off or something. If you can imagine, and if it was very, very, very sacred and whatnot, imagine what your emotions would be. And Uzzah was so scared and so emotional about it. It's the same thing as when Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt. He had a stroke and he died. And so these belief systems, um, that's what you see, is that God killed him because he sinned, because he touched the ark. No, um, that's the belief systems. Okay, and so then we have, and David was displeased because the Lord had stricken Uzzah. Okay, David is kind of questioning here. It's starting, wait, this doesn't really make sense. And he called the name of that place, well, whatever. Um, and essentially that means something like, here, how shall I bring in the ark? And David was afraid of the Lord that day too. Okay, so uh, David is maturing, and so he's kind of probably uh, questioning a little bit. All right. And the act was so sudden that Uzzah forgot for a moment that the sacred chest was untouchable. And of course, not that even the Levites were forbidden to touch it. The Levites were the priestly order, and it was that sacred. Okay. Yeah. All right. Go ahead, George.
So David wasn't willingly to bring the ark of God with him into the city of David, but David took it aside into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom the Gittite and all his household because of the ark of the Lord. And it was told King David, saying, the Lord has blessed Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of the Lord. So David went and brought up the ark of the Lord from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with gladness. And it was so that when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, David sacrificed fat oxen. And David sang praises before the Lord with all his might. And David was girded with a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. And as the ark of the Lord came past the house of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David rejoicing and dancing before the ark of the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in the midst of the tent that David had pitched for it, and David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord.
Okay, now let's look at this. Okay, David brought the ark, and says David was girded with a linen ephod. Now, the ephod is what priests wore. Okay, and ordinarily, once you get into the kings and on up, then the king would have, would have his own priest and whatnot, and wouldn't be doing this. But remember that David was just I mean, it was no big ceremony like we think it was, but David just became king of Israel, and he had not as yet appointed any people to be, the priest and all that kind of stuff. So he was doing it. He was doing it himself, and he had on the ephod. I think that's what we're saying, and and he offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And just another word about that, about the burnt offerings and the peace offerings. Remember, the burnt offerings, peace offerings, these are what we now call the pagans, but this is what they were doing. Even as far back as Abraham, they sacrificed. They used to do human sacrifices, and this was part. This was part of the religion, so to speak, and part of the Mosaic law. But generally, it wasn't the king himself that did it. Okay, but in this case, it was David. All right. Now, so what is an ephod, if I'm saying it right? Okay, you see the priest or the person on the right here, wearing it like an apron. Okay, and the apron had what they call the breastplate on it, and that's what David was wearing. And I just have this information here. If you go to Exodus 28:17, it will tell you what it's all about. But each tribe, notice there's 12 squares, 12 tribes, and each tribe had well, what do you want to call those things? Stones, whatever. But each tribe had those assigned, and that's what was on the ephod. So David was wearing that particular day when the Ark of the Covenant came to town, and he brought it. Okay. All right. Where you go, George?
Yep. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings to the Lord, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. And he distributed among all the people, even among all the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, to everyone a loaf of bread and a portion of meat and a fine white loaf of bread. So all the people departed, everyone to his house.
Okay, now, this is not real significant, but there is this is a difference in the scriptures. So, because now King James says, and he dealt among all the people, even among the whole multitude of Israel, as well as to the women as men, to everyone a cake of bread and a good piece of flesh and a flagon of wine. Okay, so all the people departed to their houses. Well, basically, I didn't put the Aramaic words in here, but the difference from the Aramaic and the King James was a mistake on the word that could mean wine, a flagon of wine, or a fine white loaf of bread. And the commentary, of course, says in the Near East, fine white bread was considered a luxury until recent days. Most of the peasants and the poor ate black bread made from rye and barley. Princes, governors, and the rich ate white bread made of pure wheat. No king in the biblical days could offer a flagon of wine to each person in such a large assembly. Okay, now one of the things to note here is that when the offerings were done and the burnt offerings were cooked, so to speak, David distributed them to all the people. That was not the custom, and it never will be from now on. The custom, the meat, the burnt meat was kept in the temple, and the priests got the good part, most of it, but it was never distributed to the people. So David has been known and is known as a king of the people, and this is kind of where it started. Now, okay, so we're going to look at David and Malchel. All right, and I just put these scriptures in here so that we could get an idea here. Okay, remember in 1 Samuel, okay, Saul's daughter loved David, so Saul gave Malchel, his daughter, to wife. And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Malchel, Saul's daughter, loved David exceedingly. And she did. And she loved him enough that she let him down through a window. Remember that King Saul was always after David, was going to kill him. But at that point in time, she loved David and she helped him escape. All right. Now, so he was given in marriage to legally to Malchel. But think about it. So what happened? Think about this. All right. David was always gone out to battle. Okay. And then, after she saved David, he was never there with her. Okay. Because he had to be running from King Saul. So he was never there with her. So Saul gave Malchel, who was legally wed to David, to Balti, the son of Laish. Okay. So Saul had given his daughter, David's wife, to Balti, probably out of spite and annoyance and whatever. Okay. But it was not legal to do so, but, so what? But she's a woman, right? And so, as much as it makes us women angry, that's what they did. They could do anything they wanted with the women, and they bought, sold them, made them work. Or if they were exceedingly beautiful, they became the number one wife. Anyway, all right. Now, after David returned to Judah, he told, Saul's son, so to speak, to deliver his wife, Malchel, to him, and saying, okay, which is true, that he espoused her for 200 foreskins of the Philistines. You might remember that. Okay. So David ordered them to go get her, and they took her from her husband. And her husband went along with her, weeping as far as Beth. Now, this is this is kind of like a starting point of what David's emotion, so to speak, and his how sincere was he. He wanted his wife back because she was legally his. But okay. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and read this. Then David returned to go to his house, and Malchel, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David. Now, David was returning to his house after having brought the ark in, and parading it through the streets. And remember, he was singing and dancing. Um, and so this is after that. And he was returning to his house. Malchel, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, very snide, like, How glorious was the King of Israel today, for he appeared publicly before the eyes of the handmaids of his servants, for he surely conducted himself as a vain man. And David said to Malcham, it was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father, and rather than all his house, and appointed me to be a ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. It was because of him that I danced before the Lord. And you'll remember a couple scriptures back where Malcham despised David. So David had lived with Michal prior to his flight from King Saul, but David was taking her back by force because her marriage to Phaltiel was illegal. David had not given her a bill of divorcement, which was required by Mosaic law. On the other hand, Michal was David's first love, but because of his difficulties with his father-in-law, King Saul, he had spent little time with her. Nonetheless, the real purpose of the request was more a political move than an expression of love for his wife. In addition to this, Michal had lost her love for David, which I think we can understand, whom she blamed for the downfall of her father's house and the loss of the kingdom. Then again, David had already married many other wives. The love she did have for him when they were young had died. David was now an enemy of her father's house. Okay, so all right. And when we get to 22, she encountered David and said he was just a vain man, whatever. And so David said, and I will abase myself still more than this, and will humble myself in my own eyes. And the maidservants of whom you have spoken shall yet honor me. And this little phrase here, therefore, Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death. And of course, it makes sense if you think about the fact that even though she despised him, she was part of his household, still his wife. But he didn't have to, when they had all these wives, they did not have to consummate all the time, okay? And so that may very well be why seemingly she had no child to the day of her death. And I could go into, there's some other stories way later on that say possibly she may have had a child on the day of her death. But anyway, we can't go there. So that's where David is king. His original wife, whom I know the commentary there says it was probably a political move, but I'm sure that David still loved her in some way. But in any event, that's where we leave David at the end of chapter 6. And once again, we thank all of you for your contributions. And I so David, when he became king of Israel, David was 30 years old, and it's debatable as to how old David was when he killed Goliath. It's, I mean, it's a scholar thing, so you don't really know. He could have been 16, he could have been 14, he could have been 18, but he was 30 years old, and he's been through all these things with God, um, uh, and God seemingly guiding him uh, in some respects. Uh, but I just put this in here because we are kind of looking at his spirituality and him as a person. So I just said, well, how's he doing emotionally and spiritually? And that's just food for thought.